helplessness, and men's excreta viscid in the rain, and stiff-legged horses lying by the road, their bloated bellies shimmering green with flies.
The images of war could never fade from the minds of those who knew them, and could scarcely be conceived in the minds of those who didn't.
Arriving home on leave, I went to my aunt's house, and I found that people wanted to take me out to dinners and theatres, and didn't seem to want to know much about what we were doing out on the front. But I did explain to them that the conditions were really terrible, and that the food also was bad, but they didn't want to know at all.
When you stepped off the leave train at Victoria, of course the first effect was just that here you were home for the holidays. But very soon that began to wear off, and at any rate from 1917 onwards, one felt that there was something unreal about leave. I'm bound to say that I got myself into a state of mind where it was the trenches that was the real world, and it was London and my family that was unreal.
It was a Frenchman who summed up for all the fighting men exiled in the zone of the armies.
When we get back and tell our story, it's we who will be wrong.
It was impossible for the soldiers to communicate the truth about this war because nothing like it had ever happened before. Never had such vast armies, wielding such an immense apparatus of killing and destruction, battled and clawed each other for so long in one place. Flesh and blood and nerves could only stand so much.
Well, I suppose there's a limit to everything, but what with the mud of the Somme and the mud of Passchendaele, to see men keep on sinking into the slime, dying in the slime, I think it absolutely finished me off, because I knew for 3 months before I was wounded that I was going to get it. And there was one time when the ammunition wagons were coming up, and I'd been in this mud right up to my waist, and I thought, well, this is it. I'll put my leg under the wagon. And I did. I got as close to that wagon as possible, and I just couldn't do it. But I think I was broken in spirit and mind.
By the end of 1917, every army had shown the effects of this unremitted strain, eating away morale. Newcomers might still be eager, still imbued with the enthusiasm of earlier years. They were startled at what they found.
You see, when I joined up, I was dead scared I wouldn't get out to France before it was over. I thought it would be over before I get there. And when I got there, when I got into the line, I remember writing back home saying, but the heart's been blown out of these people.
This was now almost entirely a citizen army, a vast force approaching 5 millions, nearly 2 millions of them on the Western Front. In all the time that this army remained in the field, there were 304,000 trials by court-martial. 3,080 death sentences were passed. 346 were carried out.
He stood tied to a post against a wall, and he was in civilian clothes, and there was a little white piece of paper pinned over his heart, and he had to fire at that. We did not know what our rifles were loaded with. Some were loaded with ball, others with blank. We then had the order to fire and pull the trigger. one knew by the recoil if it was loaded with ball or not. Then that deserter's name was read out on 3 successive parades as a warning.
The overwhelming majority of these executions took place on the Western Front. More than 3/4 were for desertion. The next most frequent crime was murder.
Firing party.
Despite every depressing circumstance, the discipline of the soldiers of the British Empire did not break down. But every last shred of humor and optimism was needed to maintain it. Yet, the Western Front had its compensations. The war years, said one British soldier who served there, will stand out in the memories of vast numbers of those who fought as the happiest period of their lives. He went on,
in spite of all differences in rank, we were comrades, brothers, dwelling together in amity. We were privileged to see in each other that inner, ennobled self, which in the grim commercial struggle of peacetime is all too frequently atrophied for lack of expression. We could note the intense affection of soldiers for certain officers, their absolute trust in them. We saw the love, passing the love of women, of one pal for his half-section. We were privileged, in short, to see a reign of goodwill among men, which the piping times of peace, with all their organized charity, their free meals, free hospitals, and Sunday sermons, have never equaled. Otherwise, we could not have stuck it.
the code of frontline behavior became the only one worth having. Hateful, disgusting, terrifying, the zone of the armies was nevertheless the only place to be.
For my part, I am more glad of that experience than of anything else I've known.
The ultimate test of optimism by now was the front itself. Was it hopeless? Was it insane to expect a decision on this static, immovable battlefield? The argument had lasted right through the war. It reached the extremes of bitterness in 1917. On the one hand were those who believed, and constantly repeated, that the Western Front was a hopeless arena. Their chief spokesman was Britain's Prime Minister, David Lloyd George.
The Allied strategy in France had been a sanguinary mistake which nearly brought us to irretrievable defeat. The Allied generals were completely baffled by the decision of the Germans to dig in. In their hopeless effort to break through, they could think of nothing better than the sacrifice of millions of men.
By 1917, Lloyd George's detestation of the Western Front was adamant, and he expressed it freely.
He said that he was not prepared to accept the position of a butcher's boy driving cattle to the slaughter, and that he would not do it.
To the British generals, the front had a different significance. The Chief of Imperial General Staff, Sir William Robertson, said,
"In the Great War, the decisive front was fixed for us by the deployment of the enemy's masses in France and Belgium."
Britain's allies endured mixed fortunes as 1917 drew to an end. The October Revolution threw Russia out of the war, robbing the alliance of her limitless manpower. And the United States of America, after 8 months of war, could only place 4 divisions in France, only 1 in the line. Italy sustained a loss of over 300,000 men in 3 weeks at Caporetto. British and French divisions had to be rushed to her aid. The one satisfactory feature was the revival of France. Carefully nursed by its commander-in-chief, General Pétain, the French army slowly recovered its courage and dash. The French nation, too, found new spirit, embodied as so often in one man. On November the 15th, Monsieur Georges Clemenceau became Premier of France. He was 76 years old, a radical of the sternest breed, called the Tiger. Winston Churchill wrote,